Right. Okay, and here's Dr. Lydon. So, okay, I think our team is all here, so I'll give one more minute and then we'll start. Why am I not seeing Dr. Oh, there she is. Oh, okay, right. Well, I think we can start. I'm sure people are going to trickle in. That's perfectly fine. I will ask our team to introduce each other. So what I'm gonna start myself. So I'm Dr. Kogan, Chief Medical Officer of CIM, and I'm a kind of a physician who is overseeing clinical aspects of the recode, although we just want to call this a cognitive program at our clinic. I think we're doing recode, we're doing more than recode. So with that, I'll pass it on. I'm just going to call on, and the next person can call on the next person. Mariana, why don't you go next?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kogan. So my name is Mariana Ledinak.
We can't hear you, right?
Oh,
Can you
oh,
hear her? Oh,
I can hear Dr.
hmm.
Ladinette.
can you guys
Okay,
hear
keep
me?
going.
Okay, okay, thank you. So hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here with all of you. I may know some of you, may not know all of you, but my name is Mariana Ledinak. I'm a naturopathic physician, and as part of the RECODE team, I do functional medicine and particularly focus on hormones, assessing hormone balance and treatment, and bioidentical hormone therapy. Sally, you can go next.
Thanks, Mariana. My name is Sally Novak, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker here at CIM. In the RECODE program, I have the privilege of facilitating our support groups, and these groups are designed to create community and foster connection among participants, something research tells us is not just emotionally valuable, but therapeutically essential. Studies consistently show that social engagement and meaningful relationships actually slow cognitive decline. And when in our groups we gather together, share our experiences, and support one another, we're not just feeling better, but we're literally supporting our brain health. And beyond fostering connection, I am also deeply committed to helping each of you maintain your sense of agency through this journey. A diagnosis doesn't define you. And the RECODE protocol recognizes that you are an active participant in your own healing. I also facilitate a separate support group for care partners and family caregivers. Um, I especially want to reach out to those of you who are recently diagnosed or just beginning to engage, because this can feel overwhelming at first, and that's completely normal. Please know that I am here as a resource for you. Whether you have questions about how do I integrate this into my life, or you need support processing the emotional aspects of your diagnosis, or simply want to connect with others who understand what you're going through. Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Jonah.
Hello, everybody. It's great to see you all joining us, and both some new faces and some familiar faces. But I focus on the aspect of mold and biotoxin related illness within the RECODE. So we know there's several different types or root causes of cognitive decline and dementia and Alzheimer's, and mold is absolutely one of them, and it's kind of its own complex beast for anybody who's had to address that piece. So generally, when I'm working with people, like, we're pretty intensely focused on getting people out of exposure, getting the body detoxed, and then being able to shut down the inflammation that triggers in the brain, and to help promote healing and repair. But yeah, great to see everybody. And I will pass it to Hannah.
Thanks, Dr. Dieko. Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah. I've met a lot of you over the phone before or through Charm messaging, but I am the RECODE program coordinator and your first point of contact for any administrative needs that you might need, usually lab work or pharmacies, or just any questions or feedback. I'm always here to support you. Hopefully, many of you have my phone number, my direct line, but I will add it in the chat at some point so you all have access. Otherwise, I'm always available over Charm as well. And then lastly, I'll pass it to Adjoa.
Hi, everyone. Um, as you all probably know, I'm the person that messes with your food. Help you to give up some of those things that you really like and hopefully try to make it fun and not see this diet as negative, but learn to do nice and fun things with it. And so, we do intermittent fasting. We try to do some seasonal stuff that helps break up the monotony and just really, get into the idea that your food is your medicine and being mindful about what you eat and what that food is doing for you. Whether it's like alleviating depression or making you feel better, more healed as it's going down. So just being aware of food, and that's one of the cornerstones of this program, as well as our exercise and dealing with stress. So we try to talk about all those things that impact our health, impact our brain, and try to, work those in a very, non-stressful way when possible. And so, it's a constant struggle. So I'm here to help support that. And I'll turn it back over to Dr. Kogan.
Hi, everybody, again. So I'm going to take about 15 minutes now to talk about three separate topics. We're going to, of course, start with probably the topic you all really want to hear about, the way I will do this, I'll just share my screen. So, of course, that's the preprint of the randomized controlled trial of the RECODE itself. Now, I will give you a full disclosure. This is a preprint, as you can see, preprint. What does that mean? Well, it means that it has not been yet fully peer-reviewed. You have this clearly here stated. This is non-peer-reviewed version, but I anticipate that the paper will be published in almost identical way. Now, will it be published in JAMA? No, it will not be. It will be published in Journal of Alzheimer's Association or something similar, but it will be a good, most likely a very good peer-reviewed journal. So let's dive right in. So those of you who've been following this for quite some time know that the program has been already evaluated in an uncontrolled trial of 24 patients a couple of years back, and that was published in peer-reviewed journal. And this is a similar take. The difference is that here there's a control group. And the way the control group was set up is basically you had patients who were going through the trial, so the group A, and then you had a group B, which was a control. Group B eventually was offered to enter the trial later on, 9 months later. So what the group B is, you can see it's a standard of care. Now, what does the standard of care means? It means that the patients were followed, let's say, by their neurologist and were either offered some medications or not, but were just continuously observed. After the 9 months, the patients in group B had opportunity to come back and join the trial. Now, they're not assessing that effect. So I'm not going to give you all this information. We are, of course, going to make sure that you have an access to this preprint. Preprint is available in free to all access. So it's open access right now. You can look at this. What I'm going to show you is immediately I'm going to drop to the results and will to tell you that results were magnificent. The results were even better than in an uncontrolled trial. You can see that a lot of parameters have improved biologically. So vitamin D, for example, improved significantly. C-reactive protein, here it was low, so it stayed low. But certain things, sugar got better. HDL unchanged, but A1C improved. Homocysteine improved substantially from 9.8 to 7.8. So wherever you look, there was most of the time there was a biologic improvement of variety of biomarkers that we observe. So that reason we do the tests on a regular basis with all of you is because we want to follow these parameters. And I will come back to this in a bit because it's a critical aspect of conversation. So I'm not going to tell you everything that happened here. It's just across the board, but the point being is there are a lot of significant differences. So the most important findings are going to be lower. They're going to be here in the specific types of assessments in different forms. So the Alzheimer's questionnaire change I'm going to skip because in reality that's not clinically commonly used, although it's important. This one I'm also going to skip, but this is the one that I'm going to concentrate on. First of all, so the PROMIS is a standard of care for assessment of quality of life. So if you're seeing the score starting at 50, which is pretty high to begin with, but then it climbs to 56 versus in the control group, there was no change, slight worsening. So clearly there was a very significant improvement in quality of life across the board in patients who were treated in the active group in the RECODE itself. Gonna skip to the next. And then this is probably the most important finding. So those of you who are on Apollo and doing CNS vitals, you understand this test. Those of you who don't, I'm going to summarize it very quickly. CNS vitals is a quite involved test. It takes somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes to do. It's not an easy test to do, but it's probably one of the most accurate. It's particularly most accurate when you're looking at patients who are doing well. So patients in the early phase of cognitive decline where the parameter is still very high. 90, for example, is very high, right? So if you have done your own CNS vitals, you can think of your total number. What you can see is a pretty dramatic difference. So patients who were in the active treatment group in this dotted line, you started at around 92, you ended up at around 107. So this is a 15-point improvement versus patients who were in the control group started a little bit higher on average at 97, let's say, and then went down. If you think about what is expected, this is very expected. We do know that no matter what treatment patients with Alzheimer's are getting, whether it's new infusion medications or older medications, you're simply going to continue to decline. You're going to potentially decline slower if you get some of this medication than if you do absolutely nothing, but you will continue to decline. So this is an expected results, and obviously this is a quite dramatic improvement compared to that. So that was one important finding. Here they just break this down in the neurocognitive total index versus specific parts of that index. So composite memory is one, but you're going to see this repeat again and again. So it's consistent among different ways of looking at the score. I will show you a couple of other parameters and I'll talk through them because they're important. So there is something called Montreal Cognitive Assessment or MoCA. And this test is a standard in the every memory clinic. CNS vitals is not a standard test. It's a very advanced test. It's much more accurate than MoCA. It predicts early changes at the much better level. However, it is not a standard of care. The standard of care is MoCA. So every neurology clinic in the country will do MoCA, or sometimes there are a couple other tests. There's SLUMS, there's MoCA. Can everybody please mute, or you guys on the team, can you make sure everybody's muted? So what you can see on the MoCA, both categories improved. The control group started at around 23 and ended up at around 25. I'll come back to that in a second. And the active group started at 24 and went up all the way to 27.5 or 27. That is a profound, basically, they started with a mild early process and ended up completely normalizing, reversing Alzheimer's completely. 27 is, by every standard out there, is completely normal result. So if I wake up my team members at 2 a.m. and ask them to do this test, it's almost for sure they're not going to score 30, they're going to score 27 or 28, placing themselves right at this dot at the end of the trial. So what does this mean with the placebo? Why did placebo improve? Unfortunately, MoCA test is not perfect. That's why we prefer CNS vitals and BOLCA test. We don't like MoCA test in our program because you can memorize the MoCA test. So people who are in an early phase of neurocognitive impairment, because MoCA only has 4 or 5 different forms of the test, even if you rotate them, patients unfortunately end up memorizing some of the answers without actually answering the test. They're simply memorizing parts of the test itself. That is probably why it's improved. There's also could be improvement with the fact that in the control arm, patients were still followed. They were still told to eat well, even though they were not necessarily told what food to eat. They still had an engagement with the team. And it's known that when you aggressively engaging participants in any support form, that Sally is smiling, that you always improve results. I mean, that's just a known fact. And particularly, it probably has to do with the fact that the family then also gets really engaged and really pushes the loved one to do better things, even if those better things not fully controlled in the trial. So that's the last about this. Now, they did assess, as you know, and this is true with the first trial, they looked at everything, not just at biological markers, but they also looked at MRI results. Here, things were very confusing, to say the least. They were all over the place. Whether you were in an active treatment group or you were in a placebo or in a control group, it's not a placebo, the control group, you can see that in both groups, there was half of the patients who saw an increase in hippocampal volume and half saw a decrease. And it was relatively equal, maybe slightly better in an active group, but it wasn't statistically significant. Odd ratios were basically nothing. It's one. So what does this mean? I don't know. So when I was listening into the presentation and somebody asked it, the thinking is that takes a lot longer. The trial was only 9 months. So it's very hard to say what happens with the volumes of the brain in such a short period of time. So maybe that was one point. Similarly, they did not assess all of the biomarkers. They did look into the p-tau 217, as you can see, and the ratio of 42, AB 42 and 40, and FL and GFF. The reality is there's no point in discussing this. The results were kind of all over the place. There were hints, but there was nothing, I would say, superbly clear. And again, that's consistent with what we're observing, because in reality, especially in the beginning, sometimes actually increase in p-tau may not mean that you're getting worse. It may literally means you're simply releasing some of the p-tau that may be a predictor that your down the road is going to improve. So there is still a lack of consensus how to interpret follow-up of these numbers. And then I'm going to tell you one other thing, which is probably everybody wants to see. So how does the Aventia trial, which is this trial, which is the Bredesen trial, compares to, let's say, Leqembi or Dr. Isaacson preventive program, or, well, we don't really care about donanemab anymore, but let's say an Ornish or even the Pointer study, which was just the lifestyle changes. Well, you can see it's doing dramatically better. So this is the odds ratio in terms of how you would predict clinical outcomes. So if you're starting at 0.0 and Pointer sits at, I don't know, 0.1 here, well, the Bredesen trial is 10 times better. If you compare it to Ornish, it's about 50% better. This is the numbers on the right here. Now, does this mean that every patient in this group responded? No, but most did. The response rate was over 90%. And here I'm going to talk now, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to talk about two other things related to this trial, which is number one, half of the patients in the trial received other things: hyperbaric oxygen, red light therapy, 40 hertz therapy. Some patients were receiving medications. So it was mixed bag. It does seem that in the mixed bag, which is I'm not showing you those pictures, but in the mixed bag, people tend to do better. So adding additional things seems to produce additional benefit, but it's unpredictable, meaning it's not clear what benefit that additional things you're going to do going to give you. There's no clarity on that yet. So that's one very important point. The second important point is what they have observed is that if you don't follow almost everything, there is never going to be a result. So in essence, they basically they had a pre-run and it excluded any patients that couldn't follow the protocol. So if you're not following protocol 90% or 95%, they will not maintain you. And this is what basically I feel like Apollo is going to enforce. Apollo going to start telling, if you're not able to follow, you need to leave, because it's a waste of effort and it's not going to produce any benefits. And this comes up all the time. Patients always ask me, well, we're not going to do all this. It's too much. What can I do half? And the answer is no, you cannot. There's going to be no benefit. Now, will there be some benefit versus doing nothing? Probably yes. The problem is that, if we follow this trial and we say, in order for us to get to this level of effectiveness, we cannot do 50%. So that's basically the crux of it. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to kick anybody out. That's not what I'm trying to say. But what I hope it means is that the reason you may have heard from us again and again getting Hannah into your face and saying you need to work with her, because that's the only way we can maintain the cohesiveness, right? I mean, we're a busy practice. We're seeing tons of patients. We're seeing 6,000 patients a year, roughly. We're not able to chase you around the block unless there is a system for that, which is HANA for you. So please, please, please make sure that you don't disappear for 3, 4 months and we don't know what's going on with you. This program, they had 10 hours per week with patients in this program. Let me repeat this: 10 hours per week of coaching, checking in, making sure everything gets done. Yes, it's unrealistic. We're not going to chase you around for 10 hours a week. Nobody's going to be able to afford that. But we're going to try to chase you for an hour a month at least, because that's that minimum that requires for us to say we want to give you the best chance to success. Without that additional time, we just simply can't do that. We just can't. There are things that are going to fall through. You have seen complexity. You have seen number of things that have to be done. I'm not even telling you, if let's say you have a mold toxicity, well, good luck with that. You're going to really have to work with Dr. Yekil on a weekly basis because the complexity is even more than. So that's topic number one. I took a lot more time. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to drop the 2 other topics towards the end. I still think I'll fit them in somewhere there. But now what I want to do is, first of all, let's see what questions and answers you have regarding the trial, if there's anything immediate. Otherwise, I will open up to our team to talk a little bit about whatever they feel like talking, a couple of minutes per person. What could you tell about the impact of the person's baseline? Right, so that's a great point. So as you can see from what I showed, the baseline on these patients, they were much younger. They were somewhere in their 60s and early 70s. Our average in our clinic is closer to 80 at the onstart of the program. And they were also a lot earlier in the onset. So we take on everybody. They only took patients who were in the first year or two. They never took patients who were more than, you saw the MoCA at the beginning, right? MoCA at 24 is basically just 1 or 2 points below normal. We routinely see numbers under the 20 and we still take those patients. So yes, they started at a very different point. Their baseline was a lot milder. And that was done on a purpose. Obviously, the more progressed disease, the harder it is to reverse it and the harder it is to manage it. So that's why it was done. Change was universal. Only patients who were changing 100% of their habits were included into the analysis. So everybody you saw were the patients who did everything. So change is required 100%. So 100% of the protocol compliance must be achieved to get that results. And that is the weakness of the whole approach. And that's what I think ultimately going to heavily be critiqued. Not the outcome. I think the outcome is real. I think there is no doubt that if you stick to the program well and you have the typical features of this trial, you're going to have a profound result. So, well, they didn't tell us about the habits before the trial. The prediction is that the habits before the trial were mixed bag. There were some patients who followed certain dietary changes, some patients were not. We don't know. It was not necessarily specified what percent of patients were vegetarian before the trial. I didn't discuss that. All right, that's good. We'll still have more time for questions, don't worry. So, all right, let's do this. Mariana, any updates on hormones or anything from your end of the
Okay.
spectrum?
Yes. Well, what I wanted to say is I don't know how many of you all follow sort of the regulations or guidance on hormone therapy, but in just to give a quick reminder, in November 2025, a few months ago, the Department of HHS basically, announced historic action to um, restore gold standard science to women's health, and specifically in terms of hormone therapy. So a lot of us already knew this for 20 years, but that's not the guidance, and that's not how the hormone products like estrogen, for example, were labeled. So they basically removed a lot of the black box warnings, saying that estrogen would increase, cancer risk. Except, of course, they still left the endometrial cancer part on there. But basically, and again, what they did was for estrogen, there's actually no harms shown in any studies of estradiol, which is what we use. So that just, in a nutshell, that just, I think for physicians and patients, just gives a lot more willingness, to look at hormones in a patient and, potentially start hormone therapy. And even though that's for, typically they say you should start within 10 years of menopause, and I'm specifically talking obviously about women, there's for men is, testosterone related. Um, Anybody even over 65, which could be some of you, that's now the guidance is saying that's left, as an individual decision. Before they said no, but now it's an individual decision between the patient and the doctor. And so, and the timing, of when we would start it and for what reason and how long. And so, um, as some of you already know, who are my patients, Dr. Kogan and I talk about that and decide, if that's something worth, starting in the female patients. And then, the reason is, of course, because, even the press release with the FDA showed that, women can reduce their cardiovascular disease risk by as much as 50%, Alzheimer's disease by as much as 35%. And as we know, as Dr. Kogan has probably mentioned, that, almost all the drugs we have for Alzheimer's disease, have benefit, but they're still minimal compared to the coming at an extreme cost. And so, this is where hormones play a really vital role. And then, all the other things for women too, in terms of reduce 50 to 60% bone fracture, reducing risk and things like that. And then I believe if I'm right, they also took off the warning, and some of it was said that estrogen can cause dementia. I think they took that off too. So and estrogen is vital for the brain. So I don't know if there's any other questions about that, but that's just my little update.
All right, well, let's go to Adjua next.
Okay, so some of you may be aware that Bredesen rescinded that uh, okaying of alcohol. He took that back. It's shown to contribute more to brain decline than they initially thought. So if you're having that one glass of wine a couple of times a week, got to give it up if you want to give your brain the best chance. And coffee, 1 cup a day. I get questions about that a lot. So try to find something else to stimulate you. Green tea or exercise or, games and stuff like that. And also, I just wanted to address the new food guidelines that raise the amount of protein. Uh, that's not a good thing. Um, I don't think they've come out with something specifically on that, but please don't get your hopes up about eating more protein because that can cause problems, in your body and sort of sabotage your health in general, but especially your brain health. So, yeah, those are the updates. I do want to say that it really is difficult to do this program, and that's why I like to try to have people think about what they're going to get out of this. Why are you sacrificing for this? It could be, to complete a project, to see your grandkids grow up, to do whatever, but get in touch with that thing that will help you to give up the piece of cake or the cookies or the ice cream or chips or whatever it is that you really feel like you have to have. And it also is important to look at what those things do for you. Because sometimes when we don't have enough sweetness in our lives, we rely on the cookies or other forms of sweeteners to give us that. So we can actually do a little bit better by ourselves by doing something that gives us a little bit more meaning in our lives. And we won't rely on food as much to, make us happy or, feel good or those kinds of things. So um, just, remember that half of that plate has to be vegetables, raw vegetables and cooked vegetables, some resistant starches, and your protein. Not a whole lot of proteins. I know a lot of people, don't like the fact that, you limit to, 3, 4, or 5 ounces of meat or animal protein, let's put it that way. And, you can do that very well. You can exist off of, we don't need as much protein as we think. And it's best to get your protein midday, maybe for lunch, the bulk of it, because that's when your digestive fires are hottest. They burn hottest, and you burn up the nutrients, and they get absorbed in your body. At night, when we're going, the sun is down, we're slowing down. Food can stay in our stomachs and not digest as well. We don't even have the acid as strong as we would normally. So best to eat your biggest, heaviest meal midday, and you can have a meal at dinner time that just has very little protein. So we do need protein to preserve our muscles and strength, but we don't need a whole lot of it. And I think that will do it for me. 1.5. Let me see.
Great. Well, let's go to Sally.
No major updates other than to say that I am really looking forward to this upcoming year and working to be have our support network be more streamlined and for members of our program and also just CIM people who are following the protocol to whatever degree they can have more access to me and each other and to be more interactive. That's what I'm hoping to accomplish in this new year. So
I think
feel.
one thing I want to, while you're on this, I
Mhm.
want to highlight is, and this is not necessarily clear from trial. I think this is more from me listening into some of the Bredesen interviews of other people. It seems like the neurostimulation becomes more and more critical, not maybe in the first few months of the program, but once the drivers are addressed. But once the person is kind of tacked into the drivers, this neurostimulation piece becomes most critical. And so I think you can work with Sally to design a program. It doesn't mean it needs to be, it's not all about 40 hertz light and sound. It's not all about red light or infrared or whatever. The neurostimulation is a general principle. It applies to just simply doing new things in life, really pushing your brain to get staying active and do other things and really go out there, not necessarily in the kind of shrinking way, right? As we typically observed our loved ones when their cognitive world begins to shrink, they follow that, but actually doing the reverse, trying to really getting out there and get more stimuli. The group is great for that, and just want to highlight Sally's also available for you all for individual consults. Sometimes that's better, I think, right, than
Mhm.
group. Not everybody will.
I think it also adds a level of support when people are willing to meet with me because I have an individual relationship with those people and I can help them recognize changes that are happening and adapt to them in real time.
Mhm. All right, well, let's go to Jonah next, and then we'll finish with Hannah, and I'll kind of grow into my couple of other points, and then we'll do Q&A.
Um, I don't have any major updates, but I do think I'll just spend a moment to comment on how much more common mold-related illness is than most people believe it to be. We know that about 30% of the population is genetically susceptible to mold and biotoxin-related illness. Statistics also tell us that about 82% of all homes and buildings are water damaged, which is huge. I think that most of us are kind of like, we're taught to believe that, buildings and homes are clean unless they've tested moldy, when the statistics tell us that it's actually the exact opposite, that it's probably safer to assume that a building is water damaged, and then therefore has some mold issues, and as opposed to assuming that it's a clean space. And not only is mold known to be a root cause of cognitive decline and dementia, but a lot of symptoms get completely overlooked. Anytime I hear somebody talking about chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, a lot of these diagnoses that don't have any real known cause or treatment, oftentimes it's biotoxin and mold related. And thankfully in a program like this, like everybody is screened in the beginning. So it's like we're looking for that possibility right away. So everybody who's in the program is like, you likely know if mold is potentially at the root cause, or if it's something that we can actually just set aside and not necessarily worry about. But it's far more common than people believe. So it's like, I mean, if you take 30% of the population, you consider 82% of all homes and buildings are water damaged. I mean, we're looking at 40 plus million people who are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed, and just completely, missing the root cause of, whatever their chronic illness might be.
Just want to add, everybody, please be aware, Jonah has a very successful program that is very detailed. One of the problems with mold, it's not just about your health. It's about the house. It's about the clothes that got contaminated. There are gazillion questions. Well, what do I do with all the stuff that sits in the mold? There's a modules, and you need to check in with him. Jonah, give us maybe drop in the chat the link to the website so people can take a look if they want.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And that's a great point. Like we've actually, I'm really proud of the program that we've put together. So it's almost, if you're going through mold, recovery, it's like we got to take you through a 12-step recovery process within the Recode program. So it's almost like a protocol within a protocol, and it's very, very intensive. I mean, an average case is probably about 12 to 18 months from beginning to end. And as Dr. Kogan mentioned, it's intensive. There's a lot of questions that come up, like, yeah, what do I do with my stuff, my bed, my couch? Do I have to move? So it's fairly intensive, and it's not very forgiving either. Just like the Recode program, like you're either all in or you're not. It's like if we make minimal or mistakes early on, it can sabotage the entire recovery. And I mean, that could just be skipping a step, it could be shortcutting a step, it could be doing steps out of order. So the program we put together is really designed to walk people through each step of the process, and to limit any mistakes essentially that are made. So it ultimately costs people, saves people a lot of time, saves people a lot of money. Not only do we have like modules for like each step that describe the process, like what are the most common mistakes, how do we address the most common mistakes, how do we manage some of the common pitfalls or even symptoms that can come up during the process. But we also offer like a weekly live Q&A. So I go on to Zoom live once a week just to answer people's questions that might be coming up along the way, so they don't necessarily have to wait till their next visit. We've got support groups built into that. We've got a forum that allows people in the program to be talking about what's working, what's not working, sharing success stories. I've even had people, and I'm sure this is true within within the Recode program, but we're working with people all over the country. It's like I've had people like get together for coffee and lunch and things of that nature. It can be very isolating. People don't believe in the illness. People don't understand the illness. Even most people's doctors roll their eyes when people show up and say, "Oh, I think mold might be making me sick." So, it can be very depressing and very isolating to try and navigate this illness on your own. And, as we all know and are learning, healing is, like doing this in groups and in community, like it adds a real synergistic benefit to the recovery process. It's like people have hope. People know it's like, oh, hey, I'm not doing this alone. I'm not the only one who has to get rid of all my stuff or move into a new space and, things of that nature. So, it's something we've worked really hard on to create this program. And I'm really, really excited and proud of what we've done. And, our success rates have gone up dramatically since we've created this container for people.
So one thing I want to point out, in the Bredesen trial, the percent of patients in a molded environment was dramatically lower. In our program, more than 50% of the patients have some problems with mold. In their program, it was a small fraction. I think that's also why in real world outcomes just not as good, is because if you really cherry pick patients this way, you're going to get the best possible outcomes. And there's nothing wrong with doing this in clinical trial, but then you're kind of avoiding the general scenario quite often. So, I don't expect that in our program we will ever get to 90% success rate. I think it's going to be unrealistic, not just because of the mold, but because we also see quite more complex patients and much older patients. I just want to identify the fact that, but what is really clear is the patients who do have mold toxicity being a driver, those are the hardest patients to treat. That's what we've been experiencing. The easiest one are the ones who have an ApoE4 copy, have chronic inflammation, and don't have any toxins in their system. Once the toxicity is identified, it always makes treatment much, much more difficult. Not impossible, but just more difficult. All right. Last but not least, of course, Hannah, talk a little bit about how we operate. You're kind of the glue of this whole thing. You're making sure the tests get done on time, make sure that follow-ups are done, make sure there's a lot of pieces to the program. What's your couple of words of wisdom for the folks?
I just want to reiterate that I am here for all types of administrative support. So any type of scheduling things that you want to get done, you can contact me at any time. Same with labs, any questions, troubleshooting, issues that come up, I'm always here as a point of contact. I also want to let you know, outside of my work at CIM, I do counsel Medicare beneficiaries on their benefits. So as of course we don't bill Medicare ourselves here, but there are some things that you will coordinate with your insurance, whether that be labs or medications or imaging. So if you need help, don't hesitate to ask. If you have a quick question, I might not, of course, be able to help exactly, but I can definitely run things through my resources and try to help as much as I can. And then, of course, coordinating between providers. If you have a question, if you are interested in seeing another provider at the practice, please let me know. I am always here to support, and feedback. If you have feedback about the program, I'm always happy to listen and forward to our providers and make sure you guys feel as supported as possible. And I'm going to drop my direct number in the chat right now so that you all have it. And of course, you can always message me on Charm if you need that as well, if you misplace it.
Great. So I see the questions already coming in. That's great. Let's just get going straight with questions. Look at that. We're right on time at 12:44. So I'm going to hold off of two other topics I mentioned simply because, yeah, they're important, but we can discuss them at some future. There's always more stuff. So, Jonah, I think there's a question for you. I did put EnviroBiomics one option. I know that's the cheaper option. I think you like a bit more expensive test that also includes the cyanobacteria, right? So you may want to put the link to that, but I think that's a good question for you. Sort of how do you deal with identifying once the mold is picked up, how do you deal with finding the right company to do the job?
Yeah, so that's very tricky, and I'm not seeing the question specifically. So
it says Lisa says I did the test. Is next step to contact Dr. Yekel or mold removal company? Well, both really.
Yes, yeah. So once it's been determined based off the labs that we're dealing with, what we refer to, it's called chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So that's the underlying physiological response that goes on inside the brain and the body as a result of exposure to biotoxins. So chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a chronic inflammatory response that's going on inside of the brain and the body. But so once that's been determined, through blood work that we're actually dealing with that, the next step would be to test the home. Currently, we're using a company called EnviroBiomics that Dr. Kogan had put the link on there. And an ERMI test is like, essentially it will evaluate for all the different possible molds in the home. And what we've learned from the ERMI, which was actually developed by the EPA, is that you can't have a mold-free home. It's not a thing. That would be like having a gut that has no bacteria in it. Like, just like bacteria lives in your gut, mold lives in your home, but most molds are not toxic. Like in fact, they might even be, beneficial, but there are molds that are consistent with water damage that occurs in a house. And so that's what the HERTS-Me test is that Dr. Kogan mentioned. So it's a little bit cheaper than the ERMI. It looks at the 5 molds that we know make people sick. He also put a link on there for actino, which is a bacteria. So again, this is a biotoxin related illness, not just mold. So a biotoxin is a toxin that comes from any kind of living source. So that could be mold, but it could also be, a bacteria. So, if you've heard of anybody with like chronic Lyme disease, well, that's actually generally chronic inflammatory response syndrome. It was just triggered from a bacteria as opposed to a mold. And we actually know viruses can do this. So, a lot of people who actually have long COVID, what they actually have is chronic inflammatory response syndrome. It was just triggered from the virus as opposed to say mold. But so actinos is going to look for bacterias that are in the homes. And what some of the most current research is telling us is that there are endotoxins, which is another form of bacteria that are actually the most damaging to the brain. And where endotoxins come from is generally from things like sump pumps that maybe are not sealed properly, or even like sewer leaks. If we've got like, Petri, the little P-traps that we've got in like faucets, when those dry out, or if they have a leak, like sewer gas can come up and into the home. And oftentimes this is completely unsuspected and is easily overlooked. And it is actually far worse for the brain than even mold is. So, this is a simple dust collection that you can do on your own. Again, I'll post the link for like the most comprehensive test. Sometimes, if we're on a budget, we'll just screen for the mold, start there. But if we can, it's good to test for all of the different potential biotoxins that could be a factor. But essentially, you go around your home, you collect the dust, and then you send it in, and then we get results. And that tells us, not only will it tell us if there's exposures, it can actually predict, is the exposure low enough for you to be able to heal. It's the only test out there. Like, so, the air spore trap tests that most inspection companies do, those only pick up about 2% of the particulates in the air. So, I mean, it's missing stuff all the time. And it can come back and say, oh, hey, the house is completely clean, when in fact, like, you're getting a fairly significant exposure. So this is the only test that not only can confirm exposure, but it can tell us, is the house clean enough for the protocol to work? There's no other test essentially that can do that. Now, the other piece of that puzzle is, okay, once we've got that data, how in the world do we find somebody who can actually properly, clean this up? Because, the remediation world out there, it's kind of the Wild West. It's a little bit like supplements. Like nobody's actually looking all the ingredients. So we know how important it is to pick professional grade, high quality supplements. The same is going to be true for our remediators. In most states, they are not required to get any licensing. They don't need to have any like certifications. They can come in and kind of do whatever they want. And of course, they're not using accurate testing to validate, that they got the response. So we've got a lot of good connections in a lot of different states. As far as different remediators, we've got a couple in the DC area that are really, really great. And you kind of have to think of this as more like a medical remediation. So for someone who's got this illness, like typical remediation is not going to be good enough. Like they need to have like medical grade remediation. And then on top of that, I work with about 5 or 6 different indoor environmental experts who specialize in chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So they can essentially, we can bring them on to help coordinate and help, people navigate this process. So we're not having to guess. Like they can look at all your testing. Once you have some inspectors and remediators come in and they put together an estimate and a game plan, these indoor environmental professionals, they can look at the remediation plan and determine like, okay, what's useful here, what's not useful, where are you being overcharged, are they missing some things, so that ultimately, we can feel really confident that if someone's going to come in and remediate your home, that it's done right and it's done right the first time. And I mean, I know better than anybody, having been through this illness, that the only thing more expensive than remediating a home is having to do it 2 or 3 times because it wasn't done correctly the first time. So, but this again is why we put together the program. Like this piece, the number one reason people do not recover from this illness is they don't get their exposure levels low enough for the protocol to actually work. So we have to have, that's step number 1. We have to make sure that the environment's clean. And if we don't do that right, nothing else is going to work after that. So again, big reason why the program was put together, for that intensive part, that first step. Like it is so important to make sure that the space is done, that it's clean, and that, if we have to remediate, that, it's done correctly the first time. So I'll share the link to the kind of like the gold standard testing that would have the mold test, the bacterial test, the endotoxin testing. I'll put that in the link. But yeah, absolutely. Like I do not, recommend people try to navigate this world on their own. Again, having done it myself, and I made every mistake in the book, and it cost me tons of money. So, get into the program, and, if we're going to do it, like, let's do it right the first time.
Okay, so time for more questions. Some questions we're going to answer in the chat. It's just easier that way. I answered a few things already myself there. So other than that, let's see if anybody has any other broader questions. While you're thinking, I'm going to then give you a little bit of those 2 other topics I mentioned. So the first topic, we have a first randomized controlled trial of microdosing of cannabis showing a reversal of Alzheimer's, just as I predicted. My prediction was that we will be seeing microdosing, but we are seeing that we're going to see mini dosing. We're seeing microdosing. So this is the paper itself. Now, this is already in peer-reviewed journal. This is in Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. So this is a top journal in the field. Just give me a second. Let me make this a little bit bigger for everybody. So what I'm going to show you, this is a very small trial, but very well done. This was done in Brazil. They started with 140 patients, randomized only 29, half and half. 14 had the placebo and 15 had cannabis. The dose was a tiny dose, and this is probably where the magic is, and I'm going to show you what the dose is. The dose was roughly 1:1 THC to CBD, but look at the amount. It's a third of a milligram of THC and a quarter of a milligram of CBD. Just to put it in a contrast, most people will take somewhere between 5 to 20 milligrams of THC. Now, why microdosing, and what about, would 1 milligram or 1.5 milligram be better? We just don't know. I mean, this is a first trial. I think we're going to see a lot more trials. We're just setting up a trial in Georgia to do 5 milligrams per day. It will take some months before we get the results. But this is the result. So now they used a different scale. It's called Mini Mental Status Examination Scale, which is slightly different compared to the MOCA, but it's older test. We don't use it in the US because it's copyrighted, but I guess in Brazil, they don't care about copyrights, which is good for them. It's a good test. It's just as good as MOCA. You can see that in the black, there was a decline in the placebo. Again, this is probably in learning. Remember, we saw that also with Bredesen trial. There was in the first weeks, there was an improvement in the cognitive assessment and then a gradual decline. So here they started at around 15. So this were patients with a moderate progression and patients with on the active group who were getting cannabis, they actually improved and they stayed improved. Patients in the control group, as you would expect, deteriorated over 6 months, as you would expect. So this is a first very unique new trial. Now, should everybody start taking cannabis? My answer is absolutely yes. I was talking about this a long time. I was waiting for something like this. Now, question is, should everybody be taking a half a milligram or a quarter of a milligram of THC a day? I don't know. I would say that 1 milligram is probably where I would do. Take a half a milligram twice a day. If you might patient, of course, check in with us. We'll make sure we set this up for you. You do not have to get a medical cannabis card. Getting THC containing tinctures away from setting up the card is very easy. They're available in the recreational market. They're available in direct-to-consumer hemp-based markets. It's not a problem. It just needs to be arranged. So that's quick. And the second point, very quickly, we now have a data that one of the biggest concern and maybe pathological driver of Alzheimer's is we do know that it's driven by our own discontinuation of production of cannabis. So it turns out when our body makes cannabis, that's what regulates the memories, and it's probably one of the most important drivers. So when we start losing production of a cannabis, that seemingly is one of the core features of Alzheimer's. That is why replacing seems to work. We also potentially down the road going to have another approach. The reason drop in cannabis that body produces occurs is because the molecule that breaks down cannabis called FAH goes up. That's been known for 20 plus years. Nobody knew what to do with that. Turns out we now have a molecule that blocks the FAH increase. That molecule is C15. It's an essential fatty acid that we can obtain from eating fish skin or eating fermented dairy, or any dairy actually, but fermented dairy in particular. Or we can also supplement C15. I'm going to drop in the link to the company that makes this product right now if anybody's interested, but you can obviously also talk to us. There are several controlled trials ongoing as to what will happen when patients with cognitive decline or Alzheimer's actually take C15. We will not have a direct answer for quite some time, but I expect this answer to be around within a year or two. So, and let's go back, and we still have a couple of minutes for more questions. So let's see. So any patient who does not have an existing cognitive decline automatically is in pre-code program. There's no reason to kind of do more tests. So if you do not have a existing pathology in the brain, whether it's observed by MRI or biomarkers, or somebody told you you have diagnosis of Alzheimer's, then you will be in pre-code program. How are the people finding the Boston? Yeah, very good question. So we're not really doing Boston Cognitive Conversation today as much, partially because the program is getting ready, but it's not fully ready. But as many of you have been following us, it will be ready very soon. We just felt like it's a little premature to discuss about this. As soon as it's ready, we will invite the kind of a leading team from Boston Cognitive to meet with you. We'll do a separate open house about it just to kind of onboard everybody. Right. So great question. Thank you, Jonas. So there's a lot of different places finding THC. That's why I don't want to give people specific source just because unfortunately it really depends on where they are in state. Some people would prefer to get it from medical dispensaries. Some people will be okay getting it from online. I do like Healer CBD. So this is one. Now Healer CBD has gummies, but gummies are very attractive. They can be cut in a very small amounts. So for example, they have 2 milligram gummies and 5 milligram gummies. So if you want to replicate exactly the trial, you would take a quarter of 2 milligram gummy, roughly. That's what I would recommend, because it was 0.35 milligram of THC. You take a quarter of 2 grams, you're going to be at 0.5 milligrams, and you could take that twice a day. Actually, let me, so you can, I'm going to give you a link to the exact gummy I'm talking about. So that would be accessible to most patients. Now, this company does not mail to certain states there, but again, if you get hold of me, I can discuss this with you further. We also have 2 cannabis coaches in the clinic if anyone's want to have the more detailed conversation about this. You guys can take a look if there are more questions. I'm gonna give folks the specific link in a second as I'm doing. But we're actually at the hour, so maybe we should just. Okay, great. So Fatty 15, yes, Fatty 15 is available on a full script. Just a quick difference. On the full script, it's a higher dose. It's a bit pricier. It's actually quite expensive. It's like $80 a month. On the website with that code that I provided, that's going to be about half of the price, but it's also a 50% lower dose. So it's 100 milligrams on directly from them and 150 if you could buy it on full script. Small difference, but because it's not super cheap, you may want to opt out for. Also, remember, we are monitoring the level. So if you've had NutriVal, it means you already had the level screened. When patients come back with very healthy, high level, I often may not necessarily even push them to take it. But unless you already have a cognitive decline. If you have a cognitive decline, I believe everybody should be taking C15 until we have data saying otherwise. And the same with cannabinoids. All right. Well, I hope that format was useful. We will be trying to do this hopefully every month, although we're probably going to be more like every other month for the first 12 months, just because this is a bit laborious for us. Otherwise, we wish everybody good weekend upcoming. And if you had something you really wanted to ask and you didn't get time or you didn't think of it, please let us know. The best way to look more, we do have a very detailed program on our website in terms of description, and that I will right now drop in the chat. So you can just come but it's under the programs. So what I'm gonna do is gonna give you a link right now. So this is the link to the more information. And of course, you can also contact us with more specific questions if you have, and we'd be happy to address them individually as well. So I think at this point, I'm going to stop. If somebody has stop recording. I mean, if you have a last moment question,